Christopher Columbus was an Italian explorer who stumbled upon the Americas and whose journeys marked the beginning of centuries of transatlantic colonization. The explorer, Columbus, made 4 trips across the Atlantic Ocean from Spain in 1492, 93, 98, and 1502. He was determined to find a direct water route west from Europe to Asia, but he never did. Instead, he stumbled upon the Americas, though he didn't really discover the so-called New World. Millions of people already lived there. His journeys marked the beginning of centuries of exploration and colonization of North and South America. During the 15th and 16th century, leaders of several European nations sponsored expeditions abroad in the hope that explorers would find great wealth and vast undiscovered lands. The Portuguese were the earliest participants in this age of discovery, also known as the Age of Exploration. Starting in about 1420, small Portuguese ships known as caravelas zipped along the African coast, carrying spices, gold and other goods, as well as enslaved people from Asia, Africa to Europe. Other European nations, particularly Spain, were eager to share in the seemingly limitless riches of the Far East. By the end of the 15th century, Spain's Reconquista, the expulsion of Jews and Muslims out of the kingdom after centuries of war, was complete, and the nation turned its attention to exploration and conquest in other areas of the world. Christopher Columbus's early life. He's a son of a wool merchant believed to have been born in Genoa, Italy, in 1451. When he was still a teenager, he got a job on a merchant ship, remained at sea until 1476, when pirates attacked his ship as it sailed north along the Portuguese coast. The boat sank, but the young Columbus floated to shore on a scrap of wood and made his way to Lisbon, where he eventually studied mathematics, astronomy, cartography, and navigation. Also began to hatch the plan that would change the world forever. The first voyage. At the end of the 15th century, it was nearly impossible to reach Asia from Europe by land. The route was long, arduous, and encounters with hostile armies were difficult to avoid. Portuguese explorers solved this problem by taking to sea. They sailed south along the West African coast and around the Cape of Good Hope. Columbus, however, had a different idea. Why not sail west across the Atlantic instead of around the massive African continent? The young navigator's logic was sound, but his math was faulty. He argued incorrectly that the circumference of the Earth was much smaller than his contemporaries believed it was. Accordingly, he believed that the journey by boat from Europe to Asia should not be only possible, but comparatively easy via as yet undiscovered Northwest Passage. He presented his plan to officials in Portugal and England, but it was not until 1492 that he found a sympathetic audience, the Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. Columbus wanted fame and fortune. Ferdinand and Isabella wanted the same, along with opportunity to export Catholicism to lands across the globe. Columbus, a devout Catholic, was equally enthusiastic about this possibility. Columbus's contract with the Spanish rulers promised that he could keep 10% of whatever riches he found, along with a noble title and governorship of any lands he should encounter. August 3rd, 1492, Columbus and his crew set sail from Spain in 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. On October 12th, the ships made landfall, not in the East Indies as Columbus assumed, but on the Bahamian Islands, likely San Salvador. For months, Columbus sailed from island to island in what we know now as the Caribbean, looking for pearls, precious stones, gold, silver, spices, and other objects and merchandise whatsoever that he had promised to his Spanish patrons, but didn't find much. In January 1493, leaving several dozen men behind in a makeshift settlement on Hispaniola, present-day Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, he left for Spain. He kept a detailed diary during his first voyage. Columbus' journal was written between August 3rd, 1492 and November 6th, 1492. And mentions everything from the wildlife he encountered, like dolphins, birds, to the weather, to the moods of his crew. More troublingly, it also recorded his initial impressions of the local people and his argument for why they should be enslaved. They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things, which they exchanged for the glass beads and hawks' bells. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built, good bodies, handsome features. They don't bear arms and don't know them. For I showed them a sword, they took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. They would make fine servants. With 50 men we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. Columbus said. Columbus gifted the journal to Isabella upon his return. 6 months later, September 1493, Columbus returned to the Americas. He found the Hispaniola settlement destroyed and left his brothers Bartholomew and Diego Columbus behind to rebuild, along with parts of his ship's crew and hundreds of enslaved indigenous people. He headed then west to continue his mostly fruitless search for gold and other goods. His group now include a large number of indigenous people the Europeans had enslaved. In lieu of the material riches he had promised the Spanish monarchs, he sent some 500 enslaved people to Queen Isabella. The queen was horrified. She believed that any people Columbus discovered were Spanish subjects who could not be enslaved, and she promptly and sternly returned the explorer's gift. May 1498, Columbus sailed west across the Atlantic for the 3rd time. He visited Trinidad and South America mainland before returning to the ill-fated Hispaniola settlement, where the colonists had staged a bloody revolt against the Columbus brothers' mismanagement and brutality. Conditions were so bad that Spanish authorities had to send a new governor to take over. Meanwhile, the native Taino population, forced to search for gold and to work on plantations, was decimated within 60 years after Columbus landed. Only a few hundred of what may have been 250,000 Taino were left on their island. Christopher Columbus was arrested and returned to Spain in chains. 1502, cleared of the most serious charges but stripped of his noble titles, the aging Columbus persuaded the Spanish crown to pay for one last trip across the Atlantic. This time, Columbus made it all the way to Panama, just miles from the Pacific Ocean. He had to abandon 2 of his 4 ships after damage from storms and hostile natives. Empty-handed, the explorer returned to Spain, where he died in 1506. The legacy of Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus didn't discover the Americas, nor was he even the first European to visit the New World. Viking explorer Leif Erikson had sailed to Greenland and Newfoundland in the 11th century. However, his journey kicked off centuries of exploration and exploitation on the American continent. The Columbian exchange transferred people, animals, food, and disease across cultures. Old World wheat became an American food staple. African coffee and Asian sugar cane became cash crops for Latin America, while American food like corn, tomatoes, and potatoes were introduced into European diets. Today, Columbus has a controversial legacy. He's remembered as a daring and path-breaking explorer who transformed the New World, yet his actions also unleashed changes that would eventually devastate the native population and his fellow explorers' encounter.